Hello, thank you for joining me at InTheEnglishCorner.com. In this lesson, I would like to talk about sentence fragments. Now, sentence fragments are major grammatical errors, and they're extremely important to avoid in your writing. So I have divided this video into two parts, and in part one I will discuss two types of sentence fragments and show you step by step with examples how to correct and avoid sentence fragments. And in the second video I will review the other two types of sentence fragments, and again we will look at examples and how to correct them and avoid them in your writing. So first of all, let's look at what a sentence fragment is. Now, you must remember that all sentences must have a subject and they also must have a verb. All sentences have to express a complete thought. If a group of words is missing either a subject or a verb, it is called an incomplete thought, and it's also termed a fragment. It's called a fragment because it is only a part or a fragment of a sentence, and therefore is a major grammatical error, and you want to try to avoid them in your writing. Now here are two quick examples of fragments. If you look at the first one, running through the woods. Now this is a fragment because you don't know who was running through the woods. It's missing a subject. Who? Who is running through the woods? So this becomes a fragment, only a part of a sentence. In number two, when he was late for school. Well, what happened as a result of his being late? You don't know. The thought is not complete. So therefore, this is also another type of fragment. So let's look at specific kinds of fragments and how we can correct these types of fragments and therefore avoid them in our writing. The first type of fragment that we're going to look at is called dependent word fragments. Now when you start a sentence with a dependent word, and I will be giving you a list of dependent words, but an example is the word since or because or although, you must be sure that you complete the idea or a fragment will result. And a dependent statement is a fragment. So a dependent statement means you're saying something that isn't complete, so it's depending on another thought to complete it, and this is why it's called a dependent fragment. So take a look at this example right here. After I finished my homework. Well, you've started with the dependent word after, so you always have to be careful when you start with a dependent word. After I finished my homework is a fragment because this group of words depends on another idea to complete it. What happened after I finished my homework? So this is called a dependent word fragment. It cannot stand alone, and therefore you have to add another thought to complete it to avoid making this a fragment error. So I've corrected it in this way and said, after I finished my homework, comma, I ordered a pizza. So it's now a complete sentence because this dependent clause now is completed with this part which says I ordered a pizza. Right? So this is one type of dependent word fragment. Now I've given you a list of common dependent words. And these are the words that you have to be careful if you begin them. If you start your sentence with one of these words, you want to make sure that you complete the thought. So common dependent words are after, although, as and as if, as long as soon as, because, before, even if, even though. And we'll continue. If, in order that, provided that, since, so that, though, unless. And the last group, until is a dependent word, what and whatever, when and whenever, where, wherever, and whereas, whether, which and whichever, while, and then who, whom, and whose. So let's look at some rules with dependent words. So note this first point. If the dependent word begins the sentence, you put a comma after the dependent clause. if the dependent group of words comes at the end of the sentence, you do not use a comma. So in one of these, you're going to use a comma. In the other type of example, you will not use a comma. Now, rules are sometimes a little bit difficult to follow, so let's look at examples because they will really make it clearer to you, and it'll be a lot easier for you to remember what I'm trying to teach you here. So in the first example, although he was late for work, he still managed to complete his work on time. Now this is complete. If you had just said, although he was late for work, that would be a fragment. And this is your dependent word, although. And if you look in this list, here it is. It's a common dependent word. But you've completed the thought, so it's not a fragment. But take a look at the use of the comma. Although he was late for work, comma, he still managed to complete his work on time. So when you start with the dependent word, such as although, because, since, etc., you have to put a comma at the end of the clause. So although he was late for work, comma, and now you complete the idea. But look at the second sentence. He still managed to complete his work on time, although he was late for work. This is good. You've joined these two ideas with this dependent word, although. But because although this dependent word falls in the second half of the sentence, you didn't begin the sentence with it, you do not put a comma before the word although. Right? It's only if you start with the dependent word that you put the comma at the end of the clause. So let's look at another few examples. So I've asked you here to use two methods to correct the following dependent word fragments. So they're not complete, they're dependent word fragment. So this one, because there was a snowstorm. Now if you look closely at this, you can see why it's a dependent word fragment. It is only a part of a sentence. It's not complete because you don't have a completion. Because there was a snowstorm, yes, what happened as a result of there being a snowstorm? So this is called a dependent word fragment. And here's your dependent word. So there are two ways that you can correct this. One, school finished early today because there was a snowstorm. So in this example, I did not include the comma because your dependent word is in the second part of the sentence. You didn't begin with the dependent clause. So no punctuation before the dependent word because. But in the second example, because there was a snowstorm today, school finished early, you see how I've started with the dependent word? So because of that, this is the dependent clause that's starting the sentence because there was a snowstorm today, and here's your dependent word here. So you must put the comma at the end of the clause. So because there was a snowstorm today, and you would pause, school finished early. So in this example, you do need the comma. So moving along, a second type of fragment is called fragments missing subjects. So let's read on and see what this involves. Some fragments are missing a subject, but they have a verb. So you might look at it and say it makes good sense. But no, it has to have both a subject and a verb. So the word group that is missing the subject is a fragment. It's not a complete thought. So let's look at these examples. The first one, Susan wants to be a singer and hopes to win the national talent show. So look very closely here. The first sentence is complete. Susan wants to be a singer. Susan is your subject, your verb is wants, and you know what she wants, to be a singer. But if you look at the second group of words, and hopes to win the national talent show, there's no subject. You don't know who wants to win the talent show. So this is called a fragment missing the subject. So let's look at two ways to correct this type of fragment error. So these are two things that you can do. You could attach the fragment to the sentence before, the preceding sentence, and you could do this by adding a joining word. And joining words are these: and, but, for, yet, so, or nor. So sometimes a way of correcting an error is to join two ideas with a joining word. Now these joining words, you should remember them: and, but, for, yet, so, or nor. They're also called coordinating words because they join or coordinate. Coordinating or joining words. You might want to jot these words down on a sheet of paper so that you remember them. So here's how you could correct this sentence up here. The sentence was, Susan wants to be a singer, period, and hopes to win the National Talent Show. So the way I've corrected it, let's see if I can get that. No, it won't be on the screen. Is Susan wants to be a singer, and I've used the joining word, and hopes to win the National Talent Show. And here's a second way, and I'm going to explain the difference. Susan wants to be a singer, and she hopes to win the National Talent Show. Now, they look almost the same, these corrections, but they're not, because this has the comma, the joining word and a subject, she. So here's the difference. In the first sentence, Susan wants to be a singer and hopes to win the National Talent Show. You've used the word and, but you haven't joined two complete ideas. Hopes to win the talent show is not a complete thought, so you don't need a comma before the word and. But in the second example, right here, Susan wants to be a singer, comma, and she, so it's two complete thoughts, she hopes to win the National Talent Show. So because this one is two complete thoughts with a subject in each, and you've used the joining word, so you have two complete thoughts, plus the joining word, and therefore you have to put the comma before the joining word and. Now this is called a compound sentence. And a compound sentence is when you join two complete ideas with a subject and a verb in both the ideas, and you have a joining word. You put the comma and then the joining word and, comma but, comma for, comma yet, comma so. And if you would like more practice on this, I do have a video on types of sentences. It's called Variety of Sentences or Types of Sentences. And I have reviewed that type of a sentence, compound. It deals with simple, compound, complex, and compound, complex sentences. So feel free to check that video called Types of Sentences, Sentence Variety. So this was one way to correct the fragment. Another way to correct it was, let's look again at the error. It was Susan wants to be a singer, period, and hopes to win the National Talent Show. What you could have done was, you could add a subject to the incomplete thought, and then you begin the new sentence with a capital letter. So another way to correct that is to turn it into two complete ideas, starting with a capital at the start of each sentence. So you could say, Susan wants to be a singer, period, and now I've added the subject she. She hopes to win the National Talent Show. So you add a subject to the incomplete thought, and then you start a new sentence. So those are different ways to correct missing subject fragments. So I've written here that writing missing subject fragments is very common. The reason why is because writers often think that the subject in one sentence will also apply to the next sentence or the next group of words, but it cannot. You must remember that for each word group to be a sentence, each one has to have a subject as well as a verb, or it becomes a fragment. So here's a question, a practice question that I thought we could work on together. And it asks you to correct the missing subject fragment. So here's the sentence I provided. Johnny went for a walk during the snowstorm, period, and slipped on the sidewalk. So Johnny went for a walk during the snowstorm. That is a complete sentence. Johnny is your subject, your verb is went, and you know where he went. He went for a walk. When did he go? During the snowstorm. That's a good, clear, sound sentence. But this one is a fragment. And slipped on the sidewalk. Who slipped on the sidewalk? You would need to say that he or Johnny slipped on the sidewalk. So there's no subject, and therefore it's a fragment. So how could we correct it? Well, the easy way is turn it into two sentences. So you could say, Johnny went for a walk during the snowstorm, period. You take out the word and, start with a capital, he slipped on the ice. So that's one way. A second way, you can use the word and, but you don't have to put in another subject. Johnny went for a walk during the snowstorm and slipped on the ice. So in this case, you would not use the comma before the joining word because you don't have another subject. You didn't say he slipped on the ice. All right, the third way to correct it is by saying, Johnny went for a walk during the snowstorm and he slipped on the ice. So you've put the comma, the joining word, another subject, and now this is called a compound sentence. So I'm going to end the video here, and then we'll talk about the third and fourth type of fragment error. But I just wanted to mention one quick thing before I sign off here, and that is that you might wonder, well, what's the difference? Why can't I just keep using this example, period, and start a new sentence? You want to add variety to your writing. You don't want always just to write using a period and a capital, a new sentence, a period and a capital. You want to start using joining words, coordinating words, and subordinating words. And I have videos on coordination and subordination. And this will show you words that you can use to join sentences so that you have variety in your sentences. You can start writing longer sentences and avoid making grammatical errors. And that adds variety and polish to your writing. So thank you for listening to the rules and following this video. Please follow part 2. It is important because this only covers half of the rules, and in part 2 I will outline the final 2 rules. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in part 2 of Sentence Fragments. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.